I have a photosynthesis.
I know what He's been singing it.
Yeah, I know it's
All right, so open up to photosynthesis and respiration, please.
I love Bonnie Booty.
Yeah.
Have you ever ate any Indian stuff?
All right, so our last section here of the cells unit is about two more cell processes, two things that happen inside of cells, and they're photosynthesis and respiration. These are both chemical reactions that take place. And so what we're going to be doing today is learning about what we call the equation for photosynthesis and respiration. When we talk about chemical reactions, which we will be talking a lot about in our next unit, okay, what you have are certain materials that are interacting with each other and being transformed into new materials, and that's what chemistry is, changes in matter because of the rearranging and reconfiguration of atoms and molecules. So we're going to learn about the equation for photosynthesis and respiration. We'll talk a little bit about why they're important and their function in living things. So we'll start with photosynthesis. And like you guys told me at the beginning of today, most of you are familiar with photosynthesis and you have a pretty good understanding. Most of you know it's how plants make their own food. That's the most common definition that you might get. And that's true, but we're going to get into some more detail now, just a little more specific about what photosynthesis is. Okay? So what we have here is a chemical equation in which there are three things here, which we call the reactants, okay? Kind of like the ingredients or maybe the raw materials. Okay? And so photosynthesis requires three things in order to take place. And you could probably name all three, I would guess, between all of you. Now this first one is in a different sort of shape, and there's a reason for that. You know what it is, Eli?
It's the sun.
It's light, yeah. It can be the sun. It can also be artificial lights, but photosynthesis requires light, and it's in this shape because it's energy. Now, technically, light should not be here in this equation because light is not a molecule. It's not matter. It's a form of energy. In fact, often when you see the equation for photosynthesis written out, it won't be here on the left side. It often is above the arrow as sort of saying that it's an energy that's required, but it's not actually one of the raw materials, one of the molecules that's needed. But for our purposes, we're going to leave it here. We're going to say, okay, we need light. We need two other things. One is a gas and one is not. You know what it is, Joey?
Carbon dioxide.
Yeah, we need carbon dioxide. And what's the third thing? Bianca?
Water.
Yeah. We need water, H2O. And we need carbon dioxide, CO2. Now, when we write out chemical equations, we will often use these symbols. We can use words. We can say water and carbon dioxide, or we can use symbols. And the symbols for water, obviously, is H2O. Symbol for carbon dioxide is CO2. And we'll be using these a lot in our next unit. But just to introduce, what this is telling you is that we have two atoms of hydrogen bonded to a single atom of oxygen, and that is what creates one single water molecule. Carbon dioxide is a single carbon atom bonded to two oxygen atoms, and that's what makes up carbon dioxide. So we call these their chemical symbols. So in photosynthesis, if we have light energy available, we have water and we have carbon dioxide, we can produce two products, we call it. Okay? And what does it produce? So photosynthesis, this process, produces two things. Nicole? Kind of, but not quite. Okay, so we'll talk about it. Emma?
Glucose?
Yeah, it produces a molecule. Okay, a molecule that stores energy. Okay, the bonds between atoms in many types of molecules can store energy, and breaking them apart can release that energy. So the molecule that this energy is stored in photosynthesis is glucose. Does anybody know the chemical symbol for glucose? Joey?
C6H12O6.
Correct. C6H12O6 is the symbol for glucose. It has 6 carbon atoms bonded to 12 hydrogens and 6 oxygens. And it produces a waste product, a gas. You know what it is? Jonathan?
Oxygen.
Yeah, it produces oxygen, O2.
It's already there.
And so if we look at this equation and think about what's happening, we have light energies being used to basically split apart these atoms of hydrogen and carbon and oxygen from water and carbon dioxide, and then put them back together in a different configuration. You'll notice all of the elements are the same. We have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen on the right side. We have the same elements on the left side. We're not creating new elements. We're just recombining them in a different proportions to form glucose and oxygen. It's sort of like if you have your house, you built a Lego Death Star, and then you took apart all the pieces and used those same pieces to make the Lego Millennium Falcon. Then you have the same pieces, you have the same starting materials, but now they're in a new configuration, and you formed a new object. But you're not creating new Lego pieces in the process. Herschel?
Who made these symbols?
These symbols, you mean like C for carbon, H for, or just C6H12O6? It's telling you the proportion because it tells you in one molecule of glucose how much carbon, how much hydrogen, how much oxygen. So it's not that somebody made them, it's just that's what they are.
Are they like literally dots that...
We draw them often as dots or circles, but that's not really what they look like. So this is photosynthesis. And this glucose, that's what's important. So when you guys always say, okay, plants make their own food, well now we won't say that anymore. What they really are making is glucose. That's what plants use as their food. Okay? They're not making little pizzas and tiny little veggie burgers and stuff. They're making a single molecule called glucose, and that's what the plants use as their food. Bianca?
On the test, are we going to have to know that glucose is...
Yep. You have to know the symbols and the words. Okay. And you know most of them. The only one you'll have to probably study a little bit is glucose. So that is photosynthesis. Takes place in plants, but there are other organisms as well that can go through this process of photosynthesis, some protists, some bacteria, and so on. Where does it happen? Joey? It happens in the chloroplast of the cells of green plants. So those chloroplasts that you saw in the microscope when you looked at that Elodia, those little green ovals, inside of those ovals was chlorophyll. That's why they're green. And that chlorophyll can absorb sunlight and use the energy from sunlight to rearrange the molecules of carbon dioxide and water to form glucose and oxygen. Now, where do plants get this water? So obviously the light is from the sun generally. Where do they get the water, Jonathan?
From soil.
From the soil. They absorb it into their roots, usually. How about the carbon dioxide?
Air.
Yeah, they absorb it through the air. Carbon dioxide is one of the gases that makes up air that's all around us. So that's where they get these raw materials. Okay? And that's photosynthesis. One other additional thing to talk about is when we have a chemical equation like this, we call the raw materials, the ingredients, are called the reactants of the reaction, and the things that are made are called the products. You'll have to know those words as well. So the reactants on the left side of the arrow, the products on the right side of the arrow. Jonathan?
Is the seed glucose, is that carbon? Or is it?
It has carbon in it as one of the materials, but it's not only carbon. Nicholas?
If it's poisonous for us to drink carbon dioxide, breathe carbon
Yes.
dioxide, then how is it that
It's not poisonous. I mean, if carbon dioxide levels in our blood get elevated, it makes our blood acidic and it can be dangerous, but we're always breathing in carbon dioxide all the time. It's a relatively small percentage in terms of the composition of the air in our atmosphere. A small percentage is carbon dioxide, but we're really breathing it in all the time. All right, so the ultimate goal of photosynthesis, the purpose for plants is for them to be able to make glucose. And so then that brings us to our second chemical reaction that we'll be talking about, and that's respiration. Now they're related to each other. Okay. Respiration is a reaction that takes place in basically all living things. Okay. And it starts off with two reactants. Anyone guess what one of them is? Bianca?
Photosynthesis?
Well, it's related to photosynthesis. In fact, if you know the equation for photosynthesis, it's pretty easy to write out the equation for respiration. Sachin?
Glucose?
Yeah. Starts with glucose. And it requires a gas. Morgan? Yeah, it requires oxygen. So it starts with glucose and oxygen and produces three things. Bianca?
Light, H2O, and carbon dioxide. It's backwards
Close.
from photosynthesis.
It is almost the exact opposite of photosynthesis. But if it were what Bianca just said, we would all right now be like walking light bulbs. Because all of our cells would be producing light and we would be glowing. So that's the difference. So it is almost the complete opposite of photosynthesis, but this is different. So respiration doesn't produce light. It actually produces a molecule that stores energy. I doubt anyone knows
Dark matter.
what it is.
Dark, isn't it?
No.
Oh, come on.
If you imagine, like in your house, you know, your refrigerator and your toaster and your phone and your television and your Xbox One, all of these things, the source of energy behind all of them is what?
Electricity.
Yes, all those various types of appliances run on electricity. Well, cells don't run on electricity, but they also have sort of a common energy source. And it's a molecule. It's called ATP.
I was gonna say.
Yeah? ATP is a molecule that stores energy. And all of the cell processes that require energy, they basically run on this molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate.
Yeah, that's a big
Science.
word.
But Bianca was correct in the rest of the equation. It does release two waste products, carbon dioxide and water.
Well, we need to know.
Yeah.
what's the answer.
You won't need to know the words adenosine triphosphate. ATP is fine. Hi, Brian.
You're a little late.
We had a fun time.
Just a little bit.
So this is the chemical equation.
It's a lot.
Thank you. For respiration, so one other fact that you should know is sometimes it can be confusing because we also call our respiratory system or respiration can also mean breathing in and out. So often what you'll see is this chemical equation is often called cellular respiration because that's telling you specifically this is the chemical reaction happening within cells. Where in cells do you think this takes place? Probably figured out. Courtney? No? Herschel?
Mitochondria,
Why did you say that?
energy.
Yeah, because respiration is producing the energy for the cell, and it's the mitochondria we know is the organelle responsible for releasing energy that the cell needs. So yes, this respiration happens in those mitochondria. Again, we have the reactants on the left and the products on the right. And the goal of respiration is to produce energy, to produce ATP for the cell. In fact, your cells cannot survive without a constant supply of ATP. It's why your cells won't last without oxygen. Okay? If you have no oxygen, if you can't breathe, your cells start to die fairly quickly because they cannot go through this process of respiration. They cannot produce ATP.
So that's what happens when I go swimming.
All right, so these are the two chemical reactions we need to know, respiration and photosynthesis. You will have to be able to write them out on your quiz on Wednesday and write out the equation for both of them, know the reactants, know the products. Now let me ask you one last thing about these. So photosynthesis, we said, happens in plants. What about respiration? Does that happen in plants?
Every living thing.
Every living thing. So if you think about it, in photosynthesis, what are plants producing? Not energy. They're producing glucose. But they need energy. So how do the plants get the energy?
Respiration.
Yes, they send this glucose into the mitochondria where they can then produce the ATP they actually need in order to work.
Do they send all of the glucose or like half of it?
No, some can be stored. That's like why we can get maple syrup.
Ooh,
Is because as maple trees, for example, are going through photosynthesis all summer long, they're producing extra glucose, extra sugars. They eventually, when winter's coming, they lose, just like Game of Thrones, winter's coming. When winter's coming, they lose their leaves. They send them that stored up sugar gets sent down into the roots for storage over the winter. In the springtime, when it starts to become warm and they need lots of energy to grow those leaves, that stored sugar goes from the roots back up to the leaves, and during that time is when people will tap the tree. As some of that sap is running up back to the leaves, some of it drains out, and then you boil it down, and that's where you get maple syrup. Nicholas?
Plants use respiration and they use photosynthesis. And if you gave it 1 drop of water, why doesn't it live forever? Because it makes water.
They have other processes that use water as well. So yeah, what Nicholas is saying is, well, they're releasing glucose and oxygen, they're using it here, they release water and carbon dioxide here, they use it here. It's sort of like a self-sufficient recycling process, and it is somewhat. It depends if the plant is growing or not. When a plant is growing, more photosynthesis is happening than respiration is happening. Okay? But yeah, that's a good point.
Don't you need energy to actually grow the plant?
Light energy. Yeah.
From the sun.
From the sun.
Eat.
All right, so any questions about that? All right, let's watch our photosynthesis song. You're going to love it. It's
Is
so
it Justin
catchy.
Bieber?
It is not Justin Bieber.
Oh, okay.
What's that?